Hello everybody and welcome back to Algebra Chapter 2. In this video we are going to be talking about slope and how you find slope from a graph. So let's talk about what slope is. Slope is a ratio. What that means is that slope will always be a fraction. Now the fraction that we use for slope is rise over run. When we're talking about slope, we use the letter m because the slope describes how we move from one point to another point on a graph. Slope tells us how to connect points on a graph and how to move between them. So if I was looking at this graph and I said, what is the slope? You would choose one of these points to start at, and it doesn't matter which one, and you would be counting how you move from one to the other. Let's start, for this example, on the left side, this point. I would need to go down 2 spaces to get to the same level as this point. So my rise would be -2 because I moved down. I would then need to go right 2 spaces to get to this other point. So my run would be 2 because I went to the right. If I were to simplify that ratio, -2 divided by 2 would be -1, and that would be my slope. Now when we talk about slope, we often classify it by the type of slope and which direction it's going in. So there are going to be 4 different classifications of slope. The first type is what's called a positive slope. When you're looking at a graph and your line rises as you go from left to right, that is called a positive slope. When you're looking at a graph and your line falls from left to right, that is called a negative slope. When you're looking at a graph and your line is vertical, we say that that has an undefined slope. And when you're looking at your line and your graph has a horizontal line, we say that that is a 0 slope. So we're going to find the slopes of some lines, and we're also going to talk about how to classify those slopes. First, let's talk about finding some of them. We know that all slopes should be fractions. So I'm going to make sure I start by putting a little fraction bar so I can fill in the rise and the run. In this graph, I'm going to start on the left side again. To get from this point to this point, I would rise 2 spaces, and then I would go to the right 4 spaces. If I were to simplify that fraction, 2 divided by 4 reduces to 1/2. In the next graph, I would rise 4 spaces and then go to the right 2 spaces. 4 divided by 2 simplifies to 2. And finally, in the last graph, I would go down 2 spaces, which means I have -2, and then to the right 4 spaces, which means I have a +4. -2 divided by 4 reduces to -1/2. Another thing we need to be familiar with is using units to explain slope. So what does this slope really mean? Since slope is a fraction, it is a ratio, the units will always describe a rate. So some examples of slope units would be miles per hour, or if you're working, dollars per hour, or if you're measuring how much milk you use at a restaurant, it could be gallons per day. These are all examples of ratios or rates as units. So we're making fractions out of our units, not just our numbers. When you want to find the units for slope by looking at a graph, you look at the y-axis units divided by the x-axis units, because this is the rise, it's going up and down, and this is the run, it's going left and right. For the next few problems, we're going to find the slope and make sure to put units on our answers. For problem number 4, we would find the slope the same way as before. So we would look at the rise, which is 3, and then the run, which is 1. But now I'm also going to include the units. The units that are going up and down, the rise, would be meters, and the units that are going left and right, which would be the run, would be hours. So 3 divided by 1 would simplify to 3 meters per hour as my slope. Let's do one more together, and then we'll save the other couple problems as examples in case we need them in class tomorrow. So for problem number 5, again, I'm going to have a fraction. On the top, I'm going to have the rise, so I'm going to go down 2 spaces. And on the bottom, I'm going to have the run, so I'm going to go to the right 1 space. My units for the top would be centimeters squared, and my units for the bottom, for the run, would be seconds. Now, -2 divided by 1 would be -2 centimeters squared per second. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you for some practice next time.